Have you ever felt it? Not a sadness, not a grief, but something far colder, far more terrifying. It is the chilling and disorienting sensation of looking out at the world, at the frantic and passionate dance of human existence, and seeing nothing. No inherent meaning, no divine purpose, no absolute truth, no unshakable foundation of right and wrong. You see the great striving drama of civilization, its wars, its religions, its art, its love stories. And you see it not as a noble and meaningful epic, but as a chaotic, pointless, and ultimately absurd play, performed by a troupe of deluded actors on a temporary stage, floating in an infinite and indifferent void. In that moment, you have peered into the abyss. You have come face to face with the great and terrible spectre that haunts the modern world, the ghost in our machine, the silent, corrosive acid that is slowly dissolving the very foundations of our civilization. This is the spectre of nihilism. It is not a complex philosophical doctrine. It is the simplest and most devastating of all beliefs, the belief in nothing. It is the conviction that all values are baseless, that life is meaningless, that knowledge is impossible, and that a single, overarching truth governs all of existence, that nothing matters. You have likely been taught to see nihilism as a fringe philosophy, the gloomy and self-indulgent posture of disaffected teenagers and brooding intellectuals. But what if it is something far more pervasive, far more powerful, and far more intimate than that? What if nihilism is not a philosophical choice, but the default psychological state of the modern world? What if the anxiety, the apathy, the chronic sense of meaninglessness, and the desperate, frantic pursuit of distraction that define so much of modern life are not a collection of separate problems, but are all symptoms of a single underlying spiritual disease? The brutal and uncomfortable truth is that we are all, in some way, nihilists now. We are the lost children of a dead God, wandering in the twilight of a meaningless world, and the great defining struggle of our time is the struggle to find a reason, any reason, not to succumb to the beautiful, seductive, and ultimately soul-destroying siren song of the void, the death of God, the great unraveling, and the birth of the abyss. To understand the rise of nihilism, we must first understand the world that it replaced. For thousands of years, the Western world lived within a vast, intricate, and deeply comforting sacred canopy. This was the Judeo-Christian worldview. It was a story, a myth, that provided a complete and coherent answer to all of life's biggest questions. Who are we? We are the children of God. What is our purpose? To serve God's will and to achieve salvation. What is the nature of reality? It is a meaningful, divinely ordered cosmos, a stage for the great drama of sin and redemption. This story, whether you believed it literally or not, provided a powerful and unshakable foundation for all of Western civilization. It was the source of our morality, our laws, our art, our sense of collective purpose. It was the great invisible wall that protected us from the terrifying chaos of a meaningless universe. And then we killed it. This was the earth-shattering proclamation of the philosopher who stared most deeply and most courageously into the abyss of nihilism, Friedrich Nietzsche. His famous declaration, "God is dead," was not a cry of triumph. It was a cry of terror. He did not mean that a literal bearded deity had ceased to exist. He meant that the belief in God, the entire sacred canopy of the Christian worldview, had, in the hearts and minds of modern scientific humanity, lost its power to convince. We had, with our own reason, our own science, our own critical thinking, systematically dismantled the very foundation upon which our entire civilization was built. Nietzsche understood the catastrophic psychological consequences of this event. He saw that the death of God was not a minor adjustment, it was an uprooting. To remove God was to remove the entire transcendent anchor for all of our values. If there is no divine lawgiver, then on what basis is murder wrong? If there is no divine purpose, then on what basis does life have meaning? If there is no heaven, then what is the point of all our striving and all our suffering? We had, Nietzsche saw, untethered the earth from its sun. We were now adrift in a cold, dark and infinite nothingness. Nihilism is the shadow that the death of God casts over the modern world. It is the psychological state that inevitably follows the collapse of our shared, sacred story. It is the vertigo of a humanity that has suddenly realized it is standing on the edge of a bottomless abyss. We are the first generations in human history to be faced with the terrifying task of having to live without a transcendent foundation for our existence. And the great open question of our time is whether we are capable of bearing this terrible freedom, or whether we will collapse under its weight into a state of profound and terminal despair. The faces of the void, the many masks of modern nihilism. Nihilism is not a monolithic belief. It is a spectrum of despair, a multifaceted disease of the soul that manifests in a variety of ways. The most obvious form is what can be called active nihilism. This is the nihilism of the revolutionary, the terrorist, the person who, having concluded that all existing values are baseless and corrupt, seeks to violently destroy them. If nothing is true, then everything is permitted. This is the logic of the bomb thrower. It is a rage against a meaningless existence, a desperate and destructive attempt to feel something, anything, in a world that has become cold and empty. But far more common and far more insidious is the form that defines our age: passive nihilism. This is not the nihilism of the bomb thrower, but the nihilism of Nietzsche's last man. The passive nihilist does not rage against the meaninglessness of life. They numb themselves to it. They accept the premise that there is no great purpose, no transcendent truth, and they conclude that the only rational goal is to make the journey to the grave as comfortable and as pleasant as possible. This is the secret, unspoken philosophy of our consumer culture. The pursuit of pleasure, the avoidance of pain, the accumulation of material comforts, the endless stream of mindless distractions. These are not just features of our world. They are a sophisticated and highly effective system for managing the terror of our own meaninglessness. The social media feed, the streaming service, the 24-hour news cycle, these are the new opiates for the masses. They are a technological veil designed to protect us from ever having to confront the terrifying silence of a godless universe, the terrifying emptiness of our own unlived souls. The passive nihilist is not an unhappy person. In fact, they may be quite cheerful, but their happiness is a thin, brittle, and deeply inauthentic thing. It is the happiness of the well-fed, comfortable, and utterly domesticated animal. It is a happiness that has been purchased at the price of their own depth, their own passion, their own potential for greatness. They have not conquered the abyss, they have simply learned to furnish it with comfortable distractions. Theirs is a life of quiet, comfortable, and ultimately soul-crushing despair. A third, and perhaps the most intellectually seductive form, is epistemological nihilism. This is the postmodern conviction that there is no such thing as objective truth, that all truths are merely social constructs, power plays, narratives created by one group to dominate another. In this worldview, the very act of seeking the truth is seen as a naive and even oppressive fool's errand. The only rational intellectual stance is one of cynical deconstruction, of endlessly pointing out the hidden biases and power dynamics behind every claim to knowledge. This is the nihilism of the academy, the nihilism that has trickled down to infect our entire intellectual culture. It is a form of intelligence that has turned against itself. It is the mind using its own brilliant analytical power to prove that the mind is powerless to know anything at all. The result is not a more just and liberated world, but a world of profound and corrosive cynicism, a world where the very distinction between truth and lies has been erased, where all that is left is the raw, naked and brutal struggle for power. It is a world where reason has committed suicide, leaving the arena to the most powerful and the most ruthless propagandist. The struggle for meaning, the philosophical responses to the abyss. Faced with this terrifying abyss of meaninglessness, the great thinkers of the last 2 centuries have proposed several possible paths forward. The first, and perhaps the most influential, is the path of existentialism. The existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus accepted the nihilistic premise that the universe is inherently meaningless. There is no preordained purpose, no divine plan, but they refused to succumb to despair. Instead, they argued that it is precisely in this meaningless void that our true freedom is born. If there is no pre-written script for our lives, then we are free to write our own. We are, as Sartre famously declared, condemned to be free. For the existentialist, meaning is not something you find, it is something you create. You create it through your choices, through your actions, through your passionate and rebellious commitment to a project, a cause, a love, a work of art. The universe may be absurd, but you can choose to be the absurd hero, the Sisyphus who, though condemned to an eternity of rolling a boulder up a hill, finds his meaning and his joy in the struggle itself. The existentialist path is a heroic but ultimately lonely and defiant humanism. It is the attempt to build a small, fragile and beautiful kingdom of human meaning in the heart of a cold and indifferent cosmos. Nietzsche, however, saw this as only a halfway measure. He believed that the task was not just to create our own personal meaning, but to create a new, life-affirming value system for all of humanity. This was the project of the Übermensch. The Übermensch is the person who has looked into the abyss of nihilism and has not just endured it, but has affirmed it, has loved it. They practice amor fati, the love of one's fate. They say yes to all of existence, to the pain and the suffering as well as the joy and the triumph. And out of this powerful, all-encompassing affirmation, they give birth to a new morality, a master morality that is not based on the resentful, life-denying values of the herd, but on the proud, creative, and life-affirming values of the strong and sovereign individual. The Nietzschean path is not just about surviving nihilism, it is about transmuting it, about using the terror of the abyss as the ultimate catalyst for the creation of a new and higher form of humanity. Finally, there is the path pointed to by Carl Jung. Jung agreed with Nietzsche that the old collective God was dead. But he did not believe that this meant we were lost in a meaningless void. He believed that the death of the external God was the necessary prerequisite for the discovery of the internal God. For Jung, the source of meaning is not something we create out of nothing. It is something we discover in the deep, archetypal structures of our own collective unconscious. The path out of nihilism for Jung is the path of individuation. It is the journey of turning inward, of descending into the labyrinth of one's own psyche, of confronting the shadow, of integrating the disowned parts of the self, and of ultimately coming into a direct living relationship with the self, the ordering principle of the totality of our being, the God image within. To find this inner center is to find a source of meaning that is not dependent on external beliefs or social consensus. It is to find an unshakable, internal foundation in a world of chaos. The Jungian path is not a rebellion against a meaningless universe. It is a homecoming to the profound and sacred meaning that was living inside of us all along. The choice in the twilight, the future of the human soul. We are living in the twilight of the gods. The old stories that gave our lives meaning have crumbled, and the new ones have not yet been born. We are adrift, in a state of profound and terrifying nihilism. This is the great and defining challenge of our time, and it is a challenge that each of us must face alone, in the silence of our own hearts. Will we choose the path of the last man, the path of passive nihilism? Will we surrender to the seductive comfort of distraction, to the easy and mindless pleasures of a world that is designed to keep us perpetually entertained and perpetually asleep? Will we choose a life of comfortable and ultimately soul-crushing meaninglessness? Or will we have the courage to face the abyss? Will we, like the existentialists, have the courage to rebel against the absurdity, to create our own meaning in the face of the void? Will we, like Nietzsche's Übermensch, have the strength to not just endure the abyss, but to affirm it, to love it, and to give birth to a new and higher vision for ourselves and for humanity? Or will we, like the disciples of Jung, have the wisdom to turn inward, to make the long and difficult journey into the depths of our own souls, and to discover the lost and sacred treasure that is waiting for us there? These are the only questions that truly matter. The battle against nihilism is not a battle that will be won in the halls of Parliament or on the fields of war. It will be won or lost in the quiet, invisible, and infinitely vast territory of the individual human soul. The fate of our world does not depend on our politics or our economics or our technology. It depends on the answer that you and I and every other lost and searching soul in this twilight age will give to the single, great, and terrible question that the death of God has left in its wake. In a world without meaning, how will you choose to live?